The evening sun cast a golden hue over Montecito, bathing the lush gardens surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's mansion in a warm glow. From the outside, it was a picture of serenity: manicured hedges, fountains quietly bubbling, birds fluttering through the trees. But inside that grand estate, hidden behind tall gates and guarded entrances, an unthinkable storm was brewing, a betrayal that would soon threaten to tear their world apart. It began, as most tragedies do, with small details that seemed insignificant at first. A whisper of doubt, a moment of hesitation. Harry, ever the devoted husband, had long brushed aside rumors and speculation. The media's obsession with Meghan had taught him to ignore the noise, to defend her relentlessly, to treat every claim as yet another attempt to undermine their love. But something about this time felt different. There was a chill in the air that even the California sun couldn't dispel. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That particular evening, Harry sat at the long dining table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dinner had been prepared with meticulous care, as always. Meghan was attentive, charming, pouring him a glass of wine while engaging in light conversation. And yet, beneath her warm exterior, Harry sensed a subtle shift. Her smile felt thinner. Her eyes, usually sparkling with life, seemed distant, calculating. He couldn't quite place it, but it was enough to trigger a quiet alarm in his mind. As he lifted his fork, a strange unease washed over him. His gut tightened, not in response to anything she had said, but to something far more primal. The food on his plate, beautifully arranged and fragrant, seemed almost too perfect. He paused, setting the fork down, and looked across the table at Meghan. Her expression didn't falter, but the silence between them stretched just a bit longer than usual. Was he imagining things? Was this just the product of stress, media pressure, and the relentless strain of living in the spotlight? After all, Harry had endured years of scrutiny, betrayals, and painful rifts within his family. Perhaps this was paranoia. But even as he rationalized it to himself, he could not shake the chill that crept down his spine. It wasn't the first time he'd felt this way recently. For weeks now, Harry had been suffering from strange bouts of fatigue, headaches, and nausea. Initially, he'd blamed the heat or exhaustion from travel and meetings. But the symptoms had persisted and worsened. There were days he could barely get out of bed, his energy drained, his mind foggy. Quietly, he had begun to wonder, was there something more sinister at play? His closest aides had noticed too. One longtime staffer, who had worked with Harry since his early royal duties, had gently asked him, "Are you all right, sir? You haven't been yourself." Harry had brushed it off, unwilling to appear weak, unwilling to confront the possibility that something in his immediate world could be causing harm. But that evening at the table, something about Meghan's demeanor ignited a deeper suspicion. Across the room, the household staff moved with mechanical precision. Plates were served and cleared, wine glasses refilled without a word. But Harry's mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from the past weeks. The times Meghan had insisted on preparing his meals personally, unusual given the team of chefs at their disposal. The moments she had hovered just a bit too closely when he ate. The curious questions she asked about how he was feeling afterward. His thoughts were interrupted by her voice, soft and sweet. "Aren't you hungry, darling? You've barely touched your food." The question, innocuous on its surface, sent another ripple of unease through him. He forced a smile, picking up his fork again. He couldn't accuse her of anything, not without proof. But his instincts screamed at him, "Wait." He pushed back his chair slowly, rising from the table. "I'm feeling a bit off tonight," he said carefully. "I think I'll rest early." Meghan's face registered only mild disappointment, but her eyes, for a fleeting second, flashed something colder. It was gone before he could fully register it, replaced with concern. "Of course, Harry, you should lie down." That night, long after Meghan had retreated to another wing of the house, Harry found himself sitting alone in the kitchen. The untouched plate of food still sat on the counter. He stared at it, the unease gnawing at him relentlessly. He needed answers. Silently, he placed a call to one of his most trusted friends, a former military colleague who now worked in private security. Without explaining too much, Harry requested that a specialist discreetly collect a sample of the food for testing. It was an extraordinary step, and one that filled him with dread. What if he was wrong? What if this paranoia was unfounded? But the risk of ignoring his instincts felt far greater. In the days that followed, Harry's behavior toward Meghan became more guarded. He watched her closely, noting every glance, every movement, every word. To anyone on the outside, they seemed as in love as ever, smiling for cameras, holding hands during public appearances, sharing affectionate gestures. But behind closed doors, Harry's mind was racing. The test results arrived faster than he expected. His friend delivered them in person, a grave look on his face. Harry could barely breathe as he listened to the report. Traces of substances had been found. Substances that, in high enough doses over time, could cause fatigue, confusion, and serious illness. The very symptoms he had been experiencing. The shock hit him like a tidal wave. His hands trembled as he held the report. Was this truly happening? Could the woman he had defended so fiercely, against family, against tabloids, against the world, really be capable of such betrayal? The thought seemed unfathomable. And yet, the evidence sat right there in front of him. The days that followed were a blur. Harry struggled with conflicting emotions, disbelief, anger, sorrow, and profound betrayal. Every interaction with Meghan became a test of willpower. He wanted answers, but he also feared confrontation. He needed to understand why. What could possibly drive her to do this? Late one night, as they sat together in the living room, he finally found the courage to speak. His voice was quiet but firm as he asked, "Meghan, is there something you need to tell me?" She looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. "About what?" She replied evenly. "About the food. About me being sick." "About everything," Harry said, his voice breaking slightly. Meghan's face remained perfectly calm, but behind her eyes, he thought he saw a flicker of something. Guilt, calculation, or perhaps even relief that the charade was nearing its end. The conversation that followed would mark a turning point in their relationship, one that neither of them could ever undo. But in that moment, suspended between suspicion and confrontation, Harry realized that the life he thought he knew, the love he thought he shared, was built on far shakier ground than he ever imagined. He looked around the room, once a sanctuary of their private life, and saw it differently now. Every corner held secrets. Every memory was tinged with doubt. The idyllic Montecito mansion felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. Outside, the ocean breeze rustled through the palm trees, indifferent to the turmoil inside. The world beyond their gates continued as always. Paparazzi circling, headlines speculating, the public eager for the next chapter in this royal saga. But for Harry, everything had changed. His trust was shattered. His heart was breaking. And yet, the full story, the why, the how, the consequences, was only just beginning. From a distance, the life of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle seemed to embody the modern fairy tale. The sprawling estate in Montecito was a symbol of escape, a retreat from royal duties, family strife, and relentless media scrutiny. Its grandeur was matched only by the couple's meticulously crafted public image, philanthropists, environmentalists, a glamorous power couple shaping their own destiny far from the constraints of Buckingham Palace. Every photo that emerged, whether from a charity appearance or a staged family moment, seemed carefully curated to send the message that they had finally found peace. Inside the gates, winding paths led through verdant gardens dotted with sculptures, private courtyards, and shaded alcoves perfect for quiet reflection. The mansion itself was elegant but modern, filled with sunlight and tastefully decorated to project warmth and sophistication. To visitors and media profiles, this was a sanctuary of love and reinvention, where Harry and Meghan could raise their children on their terms, free from royal tradition and obligation. But behind this perfect facade, fissures had begun to form. The reality inside the Montecito compound was far more complicated than the photographs suggested. In private, Harry often felt like a man trapped between two worlds, the royal one he had left behind and the new one he was struggling to define. There were moments of genuine happiness, yes, but also long stretches of unease and isolation that even he couldn't fully explain to himself. For Meghan, too, the transition from royal life to California freedom had not been entirely smooth. The relentless attention of the press followed her across the Atlantic. Though she was no longer subject to the rigid protocols of palace life, a different kind of pressure had taken hold, to build a brand, to maintain relevance, to stay at the center of public fascination. The deals with streaming platforms, the interviews, the high-profile collaborations all seemed to define their new reality. They had left the royal family behind, but not the spotlight. Their neighbors in Montecito would occasionally catch glimpses of their life. Harry jogging in the early mornings, alone, headphones in, head down. Meghan making appearances at local shops with a polished but guarded smile. Nannies and staff coming and going with a practiced efficiency that suggested a tightly managed household. To outsiders, these were normal scenes from an extraordinary couple's life. But for those who paid closer attention, there were signs that all was not as perfect as it seemed. Harry's old friends, many of whom he had grown up with during his wilder days, rarely visited anymore. Invitations were politely declined or quietly ignored. The once boisterous camaraderie he had shared with military mates seemed like a distant memory. Even those few who did drop by left feeling something unspoken hanging in the air. Harry had changed, and not entirely for the better. In the quiet of their home, subtle tensions had begun to define their interactions. Harry would find himself hesitating before speaking, carefully weighing his words. Meghan, ever poised and articulate, sometimes responded to his comments with a sharpness that caught him off guard, a sarcastic aside, a dismissive glance, or a cold silence that lingered longer than necessary. These were not the explosive arguments that tabloids often imagined, but something far more insidious. A slow erosion of intimacy and trust. Staff members who had served the couple from the beginning of their California chapter noticed the changes too. In the early days, the household had been a place of warmth and laughter. Meghan had taken an interest in every detail, from flower arrangements to the menus prepared by the kitchen staff. She was charming and attentive, eager to create a home that reflected her values and aesthetic. But over time, her demeanor had grown more exacting. Instructions were given with less patience, praise became rare, and mistakes, however small, were met with cold reprimands. It was around this time that Harry's health began to subtly decline. He would cancel meetings at the last minute, citing exhaustion or headaches. He seemed distracted during conversations, often rubbing his temples or leaning back in his chair with a weariness that friends found concerning. Meghan, for her part, always had an explanation ready. He was tired from the children, from the endless projects, from the pressures of their new life. But those close to Harry suspected there was more to the story. Publicly, however, the facade held. Every appearance was carefully choreographed to reinforce the narrative of a happy, successful, independent couple building a life on their own terms. During a widely watched interview that year, Harry spoke earnestly about his commitment to mental health and family, while Meghan nodded supportively, adding her own reflections on resilience and love. Their words were sincere, but those who knew them best could see the cracks just beneath the surface. The couple's Instagram account painted an idyllic picture. Children's birthdays celebrated with rustic cakes and vintage decor, family hikes along California's sun-dappled trails, cozy evenings by the fire. Every post was a reassurance to the world that they had left turmoil behind and embraced peace. And yet, within the walls of their mansion, Harry's isolation was deepening. Visitors noted that Harry no longer spoke with the same ease he once did. His laughter, once infectious and spontaneous, now seemed forced. Even his posture had changed, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze often downcast, as if burdened by a weight he couldn't share. He spent more time alone, retreating to his study or the garden under the guise of needing space to work or reflect. Meghan, meanwhile, maintained an air of control over their environment. Every detail mattered. The lighting for their video calls, the arrangement of flowers in every room, the meals prepared and served. Her attention to detail, once a charming quirk, had become an obsession. Staff were instructed to follow strict protocols, and even minor deviations were met with sharp correction. But it was in the kitchen, observers would later remark, that Meghan's control seemed most absolute. She had taken to preparing Harry's meals herself more frequently, often dismissing the chefs with a polite but firm smile. It was framed as an act of love, a desire to nurture her husband personally. And yet, some staff felt uneasy about the meticulous way she handled ingredients, the intensity of her focus, and the private moments when she would send everyone else away. Harry himself had noticed these patterns, though he hadn't allowed himself to dwell on them at first. He rationalized them as Meghan's way of showing care, of ensuring his meals were healthy and tailored to his tastes. After all, she was known for her commitment to wellness, organic foods, and holistic living. But in quiet moments, when his fatigue felt overwhelming and his thoughts grew darker, he wondered, was there more to it than that? These questions remained unspoken, buried beneath layers of doubt and guilt. How could he suspect the woman he had given up everything for? The woman he had defended against the harshest criticism, who had shared his pain and promised him unconditional love. To entertain such suspicions felt like a betrayal in itself. And yet, the feeling of unease would not go away. In many ways, the perfect facade they presented to the world was both a refuge and a prison. It allowed them to maintain control over the narrative, to silence critics and reassure supporters. But it also trapped them within a story that no longer reflected the complex, troubled reality of their relationship. For Harry, every public smile, every affectionate gesture performed for cameras became a painful reminder of the widening gap between appearance and truth. As he walked the manicured paths of their garden, Harry often found himself lost in thought, replaying moments from the past few years. The whirlwind romance, the royal wedding watched by millions, the birth of their children, the bold decision to leave the royal family and forge their own path. All of it had seemed so clear at the time, so righteous and inevitable. And yet, standing there under the California sun, he felt more uncertain than ever. The cracks in the facade were widening. Beneath the polished surface of their life, something dark was taking root, a betrayal that would soon come into full view, shattering the illusion of the perfect couple and forcing Harry to confront the unthinkable. What he didn't yet know was that the seeds of this betrayal had been sown long before that evening at the dinner table, and that the truth he was about to uncover would change everything. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single, glaring moment when everything suddenly seemed wrong. Instead, it was a series of small, seemingly innocuous signs, subtle hints that something was shifting beneath the surface of Harry and Meghan's life together. In hindsight, they appeared obvious, but at the time, they were easy enough to dismiss, to explain away, to ignore. It began with Harry's health. At first, it was nothing dramatic. A headache after a long day of meetings. An upset stomach after a late dinner. Occasional fatigue that he attributed to the pressures of juggling family life, public scrutiny, and their sprawling business ventures. But as the weeks passed, these symptoms began to intensify. He found himself waking up in the mornings feeling drained, his limbs heavy, his mind foggy. By mid-afternoon, he was often too exhausted to continue working, retreating to his study for what he told himself was a quick nap, only to wake hours later, disoriented and groggy. Friends who visited noticed the change in him. He looked pale, thinner than usual, with dark circles under his eyes. His usual energy, that boyish charm and mischievous glint, seemed dulled, replaced by a subdued, almost distracted air. When they asked how he was feeling, Harry would offer casual explanations. The stress of their many projects, lack of sleep, the endless demands on their time. Meghan, too, would reassure them with a warm smile, explaining that Harry was simply run down and needed a chance to recharge. Friends who visited noticed the change in him. He looked pale, thinner than usual, with dark circles under his eyes. His usual energy, that boyish charm and mischievous glint, seemed dulled, replaced by a subdued, almost distracted air. When they asked how he was feeling, Harry would offer casual explanations. The stress of their many projects, lack of sleep, the endless demands on their time. Meghan, too, would reassure them with a warm smile, explaining that Harry was simply run down and needed a chance to recharge. But behind those reassurances, Harry's unease was growing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. There were other signs too, changes in Meghan's behavior that were harder to explain. Her attentiveness had shifted in tone. Where once she had seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being, offering comfort and care when he wasn't feeling well, her attention had become sharper, almost clinical. She insisted on overseeing every aspect of his meals, often dismissing the staff and preparing food herself. What had once felt like an act of love now felt controlling. as though she was determined to manage his every bite, every sip. At times, she would watch him eat with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. If he pushed his plate away or hesitated before eating, she would gently but firmly encourage him to finish. If he mentioned feeling unwell afterward, she would respond with a mix of sympathy and exasperation, as if his illness was somehow an inconvenience. The staff had noticed changes too, though few dared speak openly about them. In private conversations, hushed and careful, some of the household employees began to share their concerns with one another. There were comments about how Meghan seemed to isolate Harry more than before, how she controlled access to him, how she seemed unusually invested in overseeing what he ate and drank. One senior housekeeper, who had worked for the couple since they moved into the Montecito estate, quietly confided in a colleague that she felt something wasn't right. She described moments when Meghan would insist that kitchen staff leave the room while she prepared Harry's meals, how she would give instructions that no one was allowed to touch certain ingredients or utensils. The housekeeper, experienced and discreet, sensed that these were not simply the actions of a health-conscious wife, but something more deliberate, more unsettling. Harry himself began to notice other strange patterns. There were times when food he had barely touched would disappear quickly, as if Meghan didn't want anyone else to see it. Bottles of supplements and powders appeared in the kitchen cupboards, but their labels were unfamiliar, sometimes lacking English translations. When he asked about them, Meghan would provide vague answers, saying they were herbal remedies recommended by wellness experts she followed. One day, he caught sight of Meghan on a phone call, her voice low and serious. She ended the call abruptly when she noticed him standing nearby. When he asked who she had been speaking to, she laughed lightly and waved it off, saying it was a friend from one of her wellness groups. But Harry couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Even their interactions had changed. Where once they had shared open, playful conversations, their discussions now felt more guarded. Meghan seemed distant at times, retreating into private spaces in the house, spending long hours on calls or reviewing documents alone. When he tried to talk to her about his concerns, his persistent fatigue, his unease, she would reassure him but quickly pivot the conversation to something else, often suggesting that he needed to trust her more, that he was being paranoid or stressed. His anxiety deepened when he found himself increasingly isolated from the few friends he had remained close to after leaving royal life. Invites to visit were subtly discouraged. Meghan would mention scheduling conflicts, the need for privacy, or claim that Harry needed rest. On the rare occasions when visitors did come, she kept the visits brief and supervised, ensuring that no one had too much time alone with Harry. At night, lying awake while Meghan slept soundly beside him, Harry's mind would race. He replayed the events of the day, looking for explanations, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. But the signs were becoming too numerous to ignore. His symptoms persisted, sometimes flaring up after meals he knew Meghan had personally prepared. There were moments when he felt dizzy, lightheaded, disoriented. He would lose his train of thought during important meetings or struggle to remember details of conversations. These lapses frightened him, not just because of what they meant for his health, but because of what they suggested about the environment around him. It was during this period of growing doubt that Harry began confiding in one of his closest friends from his military days. Their conversations were brief, cautious, and often vague. Harry didn't want to say too much, not yet, but his friend could sense that something was seriously wrong. He urged Harry to get a full medical checkup to investigate what might be causing these persistent health issues. Harry hesitated. What if he was imagining it all? What if this was nothing more than stress, as Meghan claimed? But even as he tried to convince himself, he knew deep down that the signs of trouble were real, that they were pointing to a darker truth he wasn't ready to confront. And then there was the staff member who quietly approached him one evening. A long-serving butler, discreet and loyal, who had worked in royal households for decades. The butler asked gently if Harry had noticed how often Meghan insisted on preparing his meals alone. When Harry admitted that he had found it unusual, the butler hesitated before speaking again. With a grave expression, the butler suggested, carefully, without accusation, that perhaps Harry should consider having the food tested. Harry froze, the weight of those words sinking in. For weeks, he had been wrestling with his own suspicions, trying to silence them, trying to trust the woman he had built his life around. But now someone else had voiced what he had been too afraid to say out loud. That conversation marked a turning point. Harry could no longer dismiss the signs of trouble as paranoia or stress. The pattern was too clear, the coincidences too frequent. He began watching Meghan even more closely, paying attention to every detail of their interactions, every subtle shift in her behavior. The signs of trouble were everywhere, woven into the fabric of their daily life. They were there in Meghan's sharp glances and controlling gestures. They were there in the meals she prepared with such precision and care. They were there in the isolation Harry felt, the distance growing between him and the outside world. What had once felt like a safe haven had become a place of suspicion and unease. The walls of their Montecito home, once a symbol of freedom and love, now felt like they were closing in around him. The life they had built together, the life they had so proudly presented to the world, was beginning to unravel. And yet, Harry still clung to hope that there was an explanation, a way to resolve these doubts, a path back to the trust and love they had once shared. But deep inside, he knew that the signs of trouble were pointing him toward a reckoning he could no longer avoid. The perfect facade was cracking, and the truth, whatever it was, would soon be impossible to ignore. Harry had always been someone who trusted his gut. It was a trait shaped by years in the military, where instincts could mean the difference between safety and disaster, and by a life lived under a magnifying glass, where reading a room was essential to survival. But this time, his gut was caught in a war with his heart. He wanted to believe in Meghan. He wanted to believe in their love story, in the idea that they had conquered every obstacle together, the relentless press, the bitter family feuds, the judgment of an entire institution. He wanted to believe that, at the end of the day, Meghan was still the woman he had married, fierce, loyal, determined. But as the weeks dragged on and his health worsened, that belief began to erode. Harry's private concerns were the kind he couldn't voice aloud, not even to his closest confidants. When the cameras were on, he smiled, waved, kissed Meghan's cheek. When the cameras were off, he was a man unraveling in silence. The headaches were no longer occasional. They came in waves, throbbing and relentless, sometimes knocking him out for hours at a time. His stomach, too, had become a source of constant discomfort. Food tasted strange, meals left him queasy. He found himself avoiding invitations, making excuses to stay home, retreating into the quiet of his office or his bedroom. Meghan noticed, of course, and every time he tried to raise the issue, she was there with an answer: stress, burnout, maybe something viral. She would stroke his hair, offer him herbal teas, suggest meditation or yoga. But beneath the softness, there was always an edge of insistence. You don't need to see anyone. You don't need to worry. Let me take care of you. It was the "let me take care of you" that began to haunt him. Harry tried to rationalize it. Meghan was a woman who liked control. That wasn't new. From the start, she had managed details big and small, from the decor of their wedding to the wording of press releases. She was careful, strategic, a perfectionist. But lately, her control over his personal life had tightened in ways that felt suffocating. She was involved in every decision: what he ate, when he rested, who he spoke to, when he left the house. Invitations from friends were quietly redirected or canceled. Calls from family were screened or postponed. Even moments alone were rare. Meghan seemed always present, always watching. It was subtle, nothing Harry could easily point to or challenge. But the feeling was unmistakable. He was being kept, managed, directed. His mind turned over the same questions late at night, when sleep refused to come. Was this love or something else? Was this care or control? Was he being protected, or was he being isolated? One night, unable to bear the racing thoughts, Harry found himself walking the grounds of their estate. The moon cast long shadows across the gardens, and the cool night air filled his lungs with a sharpness that jolted him awake. He wandered aimlessly, his bare feet brushing over the dew-damp grass, until he reached the edge of the property where the hills dipped toward the ocean. There, away from the lights of the house, he let himself feel what he had been trying to suppress: fear. For the first time in his life, Harry was afraid inside his own home. He was afraid of the confusion in his mind, of the weakness in his body. He was afraid of the distance growing between him and the people he had always trusted. Most of all, He was afraid of what it would mean if his suspicions were right. If Meghan, the woman he had sacrificed so much for, was not who he thought she was. Back in his study, Harry sat at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. He wanted to write down everything, to make sense of the chaos swirling in his head. He picked up a pen, then set it down again. The words wouldn't come. What was he supposed to write? That he was afraid of his wife? That he suspected she was hurting him? That the woman he had defended to the world might be the source of his pain? He reached for his phone instead, scrolling through old photos, smiling selfies, candid shots of Meghan with the kids, moments from their travels, their activism, their early days of freedom in California. They looked so happy. And yet, even now, as he stared at those images, he saw things he hadn't noticed before. The way Meghan's hand was always guiding, always placed just so. The way his own eyes sometimes looked tired, uncertain, even then. Harry decided to take a step he had avoided for too long. Quietly, without alerting Meghan or the staff, he arranged for a private medical consultation. It wasn't easy. Every move he made was observed. But with the help of his military friend, who remained one of the few people he could trust, he scheduled an off-the-books appointment with a discreet physician. When the doctor examined him, the findings were troubling. There were no clear answers yet, no diagnosis that could explain everything. But the symptoms were real, and they weren't consistent with simple stress or exhaustion. Blood tests were ordered, samples were taken, and through it all, Harry sat in the examination room, silent, haunted by the growing certainty that his life was not as it seemed. Back at the mansion, Meghan greeted him with a smile, as if nothing had changed. She had prepared his favorite meal, the table set beautifully, candles flickering softly. Harry sat across from her, forcing himself to eat, to smile, to play his part. But inside, his heart pounded. His private concerns were no longer just passing doubts. They were a storm-gathering force, ready to break. He was caught between the need to believe in his wife and the mounting evidence that something was terribly wrong. And as he sat there, fork in hand, staring across the table at the woman he once saw as his refuge, he realized that the hardest part wasn't uncovering the truth. The hardest part was facing what that truth would mean. Harry knew that the days ahead would test him in ways he had never imagined. The man who had walked away from a kingdom for love was now preparing to face a reckoning within his own home. And as much as he wanted to believe that there was a simple explanation, a way back to trust and safety, he also knew, deep down, that there were some betrayals that left no way back. Within the grandeur of the Montecito estate, a quiet tension had begun to infect the household staff. The sprawling property, once a place of discreet professionalism and seamless service, now felt like a theater of shadows where every glance and conversation was laced with unspoken questions. The staff who worked there daily, chefs, housekeepers, groundskeepers, personal assistants, were trained to remain invisible, to serve without comment, to maintain a respectful distance from the private lives of those they worked for. But even they could not ignore the strangeness that had crept into the atmosphere of the house. It started small, almost imperceptibly, like a low hum beneath the surface of everyday tasks. The staff noticed how often Meghan dismissed the kitchen team when it came time to prepare Harry's meals. At first, it was explained as an act of affection. Meghan liked to cook for her husband, to make sure everything he ate was to his taste and aligned with their shared values of health and wellness. This was understandable, even charming, in the beginning. But over time, it became clear that this was not an occasional indulgence. Meghan was routinely and insistently taking complete control of his meals, often locking the kitchen door behind her and working alone, even as the chefs waited outside with prepared ingredients. Some staff members began exchanging careful looks with one another when this happened, communicating through silent glances what none of them dared say aloud. The head chef, a seasoned professional who had cooked for celebrities and dignitaries around the world, found himself relegated to preparing meals for everyone else, while Meghan took over the task of feeding Harry personally. When questioned gently about this unusual arrangement, Meghan would respond with a radiant smile that brooked no argument, saying simply that she loved caring for Harry in this way and preferred to handle his meals herself. But the kitchen staff were not the only ones who noticed that something felt off. The housekeepers saw it too, how Harry, once vibrant and engaged, had grown withdrawn and listless. How he seemed physically diminished, his skin paler, his eyes heavier, his movements slower. They observed how rarely he entertained visitors now, how tightly Meghan controlled his schedule, how often he retreated to his rooms, and how seldom he emerged looking rested or well. It was during the quiet afternoons, when the estate was hushed and Meghan was occupied elsewhere, that the staff began speaking softly to one another. They did not gossip. The culture of the household was too disciplined for that. But they shared concerns, piecing together fragments of observation into a picture none of them could ignore. The butler, a distinguished man who had served in royal households long before joining Harry and Meghan's staff, became particularly troubled. He had worked in many environments, seen many private lives up close, and he recognized the signs of tension and control that now marked the couple's interactions. He saw how Harry deferred to Meghan on every decision, how he seemed almost anxious in her presence, how his demeanor shifted when she entered the room. One afternoon, while bringing fresh linens to Harry's quarters, the butler caught a glimpse of the prince sitting alone, his face in his hands, shoulders slumped in exhaustion. The sight pained him. This was not the robust, charismatic man who had arrived in California so full of hope and purpose. This was a man weighed down by something invisible but profoundly heavy. Meanwhile, among the kitchen staff, one of the junior chefs, young but observant, began noticing specific patterns. He had seen Meghan add powders and tinctures to Harry's meals, ingredients she brought herself and stored in locked drawers to which no one else had access. Some of these items were unfamiliar, labeled in languages the staff did not speak. The chef mentioned this quietly to a colleague, who nodded with concern but warned him to stay quiet. They could not risk crossing Meghan or overstepping boundaries. The head housekeeper, too, harbored her own suspicions. She had observed Meghan's increasingly sharp tone, the way her charm gave way to cold command when dealing with staff behind closed doors. More than once, she had overheard Meghan reminding staff not to interfere with the meals she prepared for Harry, emphasizing the need for privacy and discretion in a way that felt more like an order than a request. Gradually, the whispers among staff became cautious discussions, shared in hushed voices far from prying ears. They wondered what was happening to Harry, why he seemed so unwell, why Meghan was so determined to manage every detail of his diet and schedule. But their hands were tied. The culture of service demanded silence and discretion above all else. Even as their unease grew, they kept their observations private, confiding only in those they trusted most. Still, not all could maintain that silence indefinitely. One evening, the butler, compelled by a growing sense of duty, took a careful risk. Finding a quiet moment when Harry was alone in his study, he approached the prince respectfully and spoke in a low voice. He mentioned, without accusation, that several members of the staff had noticed Meghan's particular attention to his meals and had grown concerned about his health. Harry, seated at his desk, looked up sharply. His face revealed a flicker of something deeper than surprise. Perhaps relief that someone else had seen what he was beginning to suspect himself. But even then, he hesitated, torn between loyalty to his wife and a dawning realization that he could no longer dismiss what was unfolding around him. It was an evening like so many others at the Montecito estate, but with the weight of months of silent tension pressing down on every moment. Harry had tried to keep the stress at bay throughout the day, focusing on calls, meetings, and brief moments with his children, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, an unmistakable sense of foreboding settled over him. Something felt different. Something was about to break. Dinner was served in the elegant dining room, a space where the couple often shared quiet meals away from the relentless glare of cameras and public scrutiny. The table was set with care, fine china, polished silverware, and candles casting a soft, flickering light across the room. Meghan moved with her usual grace, serving dishes she had personally prepared, smiling politely. But there was an undercurrent to her demeanor, a tension that Harry couldn't ignore. As he sat down, the familiar scent of the food filled the air. It was a dish they both enjoyed, one Meghan had prepared countless times before. But tonight, something about it seemed off. Harry's senses, already on high alert from weeks of unease and unexplained illness, sharpened instinctively. He noticed the faintest bitterness in the aroma, an unfamiliar undertone beneath the herbs and spices. His fork hovered over the plate, hesitant. Meghan watched him carefully, her smile never faltering, but her eyes held a sharpness that sent a shiver through Harry's spine. "You have to eat, love," she said softly. "It's good for you." But Harry couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion. Slowly, he pushed the plate away. "I'm not hungry tonight," he said, voice low. He hoped his refusal wouldn't cause tension, but it was too late. The atmosphere had already shifted. For a moment, Meghan's face tightened in something close to frustration. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded and turned away. The room felt colder, the silence heavier. Harry stood and walked toward the kitchen, his mind racing. He knew he needed to be certain. Something about this meal, this moment, felt like a turning point. Was it paranoia? Or was there truly something wrong? He scanned the counters, looking for clues. Then, hidden behind a set of jars, he noticed a small vial, one that he hadn't seen before. It was unlabeled, the liquid inside clear but ominous in the dim light. His heart pounded. Was this what he had feared? A poison, a toxin meant to harm him slowly, carefully? The thought was almost too terrible to bear. He held the vial in his hand, turning it over, searching for answers. Just then, footsteps approached. Meghan's voice floated down the hallway, light and dismissive. "Harry, are you feeling okay?" He turned, clutching the vial tightly. The confrontation was inevitable. His voice shook as he asked, "What is this?" Meghan's expression changed instantly, from surprise to something colder, more guarded. She took a step closer, eyes locked on his. "You're imagining things," she said firmly. "There's nothing wrong with your food." But Harry's resolve hardened. "I'm not imagining it. I've been feeling sick for weeks. I need to know the truth." The air between them crackled with tension. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line. "If you don't trust me, maybe this isn't going to work," she said quietly. Harry shook his head. "I trusted you, but I can't ignore what's happening to me." That night, the unspoken fractures in their marriage cracked wide open. The perfect facade they had maintained was shattered in an instant, replaced by a raw, painful confrontation that neither could walk away from. In the days that followed, Harry's suspicion transformed into determination. He reached out to trusted friends and experts, seeking answers. Tests were arranged discreetly. Samples of meals, water, and supplements were collected and sent to labs. The truth could no longer be avoided. Meanwhile, Meghan retreated into silence, her public appearances growing rare and her social media presence dwindling. Those close to the couple noticed the growing distance, the coldness that replaced warmth. What had once been a partnership now felt like a battlefield. The dinner that changed everything was more than just a meal. It was the moment when trust was broken beyond repair, when suspicion turned into certainty, when the life Harry had fought so hard to build began to unravel. The fallout would be swift and unrelenting. The world would soon learn that beneath the glamour and headlines lay a story far darker than anyone had imagined. A story of betrayal, danger, and heartbreak. And at the center of it all was a question that haunted Harry's every waking moment. How could the woman he loved the most become the one he feared the most? The days following the dinner that shattered the fragile peace between Harry and Meghan were filled with a tense mixture of silence, avoidance, and unspoken questions. Harry found himself retreating into his own thoughts more and more, unable to shake the image of the small, unlabeled vial he had discovered hidden behind the kitchen jars. That vial haunted him, a symbol of the growing distrust that had invaded every corner of their lives. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Harry decided to take matters into his own hands. Late one evening, while the rest of the household had settled down for the night, he quietly searched the kitchen once more. This time, his determination was sharper, his senses attuned to every detail. He opened cupboards, examined containers, and looked behind every possible hiding place. His heart raced with each discovery. Eventually, tucked away in a high cabinet that Meghan rarely accessed, he found what he had been looking for. A small bottle sealed tightly with a cork, bearing no label but filled with a thick, dark liquid. The container was ordinary enough to avoid suspicion, but Harry knew better now. The very presence of something concealed like this was alarming. He carefully lifted the bottle, feeling its weight in his hand. Questions flooded his mind. What was this substance? How long had it been here? Had Meghan been adding it to his meals? Was this the cause of his persistent illness? The gravity of the situation forced Harry to act with caution. He could not confront Meghan yet, The consequences were unknown, and the tension in the house had already reached a breaking point. Instead, he entrusted the bottle to his most trusted aide, someone outside the immediate household who had remained loyal and discreet. The aide arranged for the bottle to be tested by experts, chemists and toxicologists who could identify any harmful substances. The waiting period was agonizing. Harry oscillated between hope and dread, his mind haunted by every worst-case scenario. As the results came back, Harry was both relieved and terrified. The tests revealed the presence of compounds that, in sufficient quantities, could cause nausea, dizziness, fatigue, and a host of other symptoms he had experienced. The implications were clear and devastating. Armed with this evidence, Harry knew he had to confront Meghan, but he also knew the risks involved. The confrontation could shatter what little remained of their relationship or provoke a dangerous reaction. Still, the truth had to come out. The moment of confrontation was intense. Harry presented the bottle, the test results, and the evidence of his deteriorating health. Meghan's reaction was a complex mix of denial, anger, and defensiveness. She dismissed the findings as mistakes or misunderstandings, accusing Harry of paranoia and betrayal. The conversation escalated, voices rising, accusations flying. The love that had once bound them now lay in ruins, replaced by suspicion and fear. The hidden bottle was more than just a container. It was a symbol of the fractured trust and the dark secrets lurking beneath their life together. The aftermath left Harry shaken but resolute. He knew that this was no longer a private matter. It was a crisis that demanded action. The walls of their Montecito sanctuary felt less like protection and more like a prison. As the days passed, Harry began seeking counsel from medical experts, legal advisors, and trusted friends. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional turmoil and public scrutiny. But one thing was clear. The hidden bottle had uncovered a truth too dangerous to ignore. The once perfect facade of their life together was shattered, replaced by a stark reality that would change everything. Harry was no longer just a prince seeking happiness. He was a man fighting for his health, his freedom, and the truth. With the troubling test results in hand, Harry understood that professional guidance was imperative. His growing fears were no longer based solely on suspicion or anecdotal evidence. Medical experts would provide the clarity, or at least the answers, he so desperately sought. The question now was whom to trust, and how much of this nightmare to expose without triggering a deeper fallout. Harry's trusted military friend helped arrange consultations with top toxicologists and medical professionals, discreetly, to avoid media attention and personal scandal. These experts brought a level of scientific rigor to the matter, analyzing samples from the mysterious vial and reviewing Harry's symptoms in detail. Their insights would either confirm Harry's fears or give him reason to breathe easier. The toxicologists explained the substances found in the vial could indeed cause a range of symptoms consistent with Harry's experiences. Nausea, dizziness, chronic fatigue, confusion, and in some cases, longer-term damage to organs. These compounds, while not immediately lethal in small doses, could slowly undermine someone's health if introduced repeatedly and undetected. The experts emphasized the difficulty of detecting such slow-acting toxins in routine medical screenings, which might explain why Harry's condition had puzzled even his physicians until then. One doctor remarked, "In cases like this, the person experiencing symptoms often struggles to get a definitive diagnosis because the effects mimic many common illnesses. It requires specialized testing and a high index of suspicion." Harry listened intently, feeling a mix of validation and despair. On one hand, he was relieved to have a medical explanation for his decline. On the other, the reality that these substances had been in his environment, his home, his food, made the betrayal feel all the more real. Further consultations brought up unsettling possibilities. The experts discussed how subtle toxins could be introduced without immediate detection, how they could evade common medical tests, and how long-term exposure could impair cognitive and physical function. They also highlighted the psychological effects of chronic poisoning, including anxiety, depression, and paranoia, complicating the emotional toll on Harry. These revelations provided crucial context. They explained not only his physical symptoms, but also the mental fog, exhaustion, and isolation he had been experiencing. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a clearer picture of the danger that had been lurking behind closed doors. Beyond the scientific explanations, Harry sought advice on the legal and personal implications. Could this be considered attempted poisoning? What evidence would be needed to pursue legal action? Could he protect himself while preserving his privacy and safety? These questions weighed heavily on him. The expert opinions reinforced a harsh truth. Harry was facing a betrayal that was both physical and emotional, one that cut deep into the foundations of trust, love, and safety. This was no ordinary marital conflict. It was a potential threat to his life and well-being. Armed with this knowledge, Harry felt a surge of determination. He realized that confronting the situation required more than personal courage. It demanded careful planning, support, and a strategy to navigate the storm ahead. He began assembling a team, medical professionals, legal advisors, trusted friends, who could help him understand his options and protect his future. The journey was daunting, but the clarity provided by expert opinions gave him a sense of direction. In the days that followed, Harry wrestled with complex emotions. Anger at the betrayal, fear for his health, sorrow for what the relationship had become, and a flicker of hope that truth and justice might prevail. The expert opinions had illuminated the path forward, but the journey itself was only just beginning. With every step, Harry prepared to face the consequences of a truth that had been hidden too long, and to reclaim his life from the shadows cast by betrayal. When Harry finally confronted Meghan with the mounting evidence, the tests, the symptoms, the suspicions, her response was a carefully crafted defense, blending denial, deflection, and accusations that caught him off guard. What he had feared might be a moment of honest reckoning instead turned into a battle for control over the narrative, the truth, and their fragile relationship. Meghan's initial reaction was disbelief. She looked at Harry with a mix of shock and hurt, her voice steady but tinged with indignation. "How could you think I would do something like that?" she asked, the question more rhetorical than seeking an answer. "You're letting paranoia take over." Harry, exhausted and emotionally raw, tried to explain what he had experienced, the physical symptoms, the test results, the patterns he had observed. But Meghan's gaze remained unyielding, her tone shifting from hurt to defensive. "It's all just stress," she insisted. "You're overwhelmed by everything. The media, the family drama, the endless pressure. You're imagining things that aren't real. You need to get help, not make accusations." When Harry pressed further, presenting the vial and the expert reports, Meghan dismissed them as mistakes, errors, or even deliberate attempts to undermine her. She questioned the credibility of the tests, the motivations of the people involved, and Harry's judgment. "Who do you think is behind this?" she challenged, her eyes narrowing. "Are you saying I'm poisoning you? After everything I've done for you, for us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation and betrayal. Harry felt the weight of it crush him, but he also knew that this was a critical moment, one that would define what came next. Meghan went on to paint a picture of a man under siege from all sides, beset by enemies real and imagined. She suggested that Harry's health issues were psychosomatic, fueled by anxiety and a deepening distrust of those around him. According to her, the narrative of poisoning was a dangerous fantasy, one that threatened to destroy their family and public image. Friends close to Meghan say that in private, she was frantic to protect her reputation, fearing the fallout from such explosive accusations. She sought to rally supporters, managing damage control behind closed doors while publicly maintaining an image of calm composure. This defensive posture, however, only deepened the chasm between her and Harry. His need for truth and healing clashed with her insistence on denial and control. Conversations that had once been filled with hope and partnership now devolved into cold exchanges and veiled threats. In one particularly tense exchange, Meghan warned Harry that continuing down this path could have serious consequences for their family. "Think about the children," she urged. "You don't want to destroy everything we've built." But Harry, worn thin by illness and deception, was no longer willing to stay silent. He began documenting everything, the conversations, the symptoms, the evidence, preparing for the possibility that the battle would not remain private. The divide widened further as Meghan withdrew emotionally, focusing on maintaining appearances in public while distancing herself in private. Her social media accounts, once vibrant and engaged, grew quiet. Public appearances became rare, carefully scripted events designed to project strength and innocence. Meanwhile, Harry sought solace and advice from trusted friends and professionals, grappling with the painful reality that the woman he loved might be the source of his suffering. Meghan's defense was more than just denial. It was a calculated effort to protect herself and control the narrative. But in doing so, she only reinforced Harry's fears, setting the stage for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of their relationship and expose the fault lines beneath their perfect facade. The battle lines were drawn, trust was shattered, and the question remained: was there any hope left for reconciliation, or had the damage become irreparable? The situation at Montecito had escalated beyond private turmoil, quietly reaching the ears of the British royal family. What was once an internal, personal crisis now carried implications far beyond the walls of Harry and Meghan's California estate. The royals understood that the stakes were high, not just for the couple, but for the family's reputation, the institution itself, and the fragile bonds that still connected them. King Charles, aware of Harry's deteriorating health and the growing tensions in his marriage, was deeply concerned. Though their relationship had been strained by distance, disagreements, and years of media-driven conflict, a father's worry transcended all. Charles summoned his closest advisors and senior family members, including Prince William and Princess Anne, to discuss the situation. They recognized the need to intervene discreetly but decisively. The palace strategy was clear: contain the fallout, protect Harry, and attempt to mediate the crisis before it spiraled into public disaster. Letters were sent to Harry, expressing concern and offering support. Private phone calls followed, filled with cautious words and veiled requests for openness. Prince William, as Harry's brother and lifelong confidant, took a more direct approach. Despite their differences, William reached out personally, urging Harry to seek help and promising family support. His message was one of care, but also of urgency. The fractures within Harry's marriage could not be ignored, and the family had to stand united. From the outside, the royal family maintained a calm and measured public stance, but behind closed doors, tension and anxiety were palpable. The palace understood that the media was already circling, sniffing out any hint of scandal, ready to pounce on any misstep. Meanwhile, Harry found himself caught in the crossfire of family concern and his own fears. Calls from his father and brother were both comforting and fraught with expectation. He appreciated their attempts to support him, but felt the weight of scrutiny press upon him like never before. The intervention was complicated by Meghan's insistence on privacy and control. She rebuffed attempts to involve the family, viewing them as intrusive and unsupportive. This created further distance between Harry and his relatives, exacerbating the isolation he felt. Insiders report that several palace aides traveled to California under the guise of routine visits, tasked with assessing the situation firsthand and offering discreet counsel. These meetings were delicate, balancing respect for Harry's independence with concern for his well-being. The royal family's intervention was not without risk. There was fear that any public acknowledgement of the crisis could ignite a media frenzy, damaging all parties involved. Yet, the need to act was undeniable. Protecting Harry's health and safety became paramount, as did preventing the private conflict.